There we go. All right, looks like it's working. Hello and welcome to the stream. I have my coffee. And I have been struggling, so let me just tweet about this real quick. Oh, how y'all doing? Hopefully you're having a nice, relaxing weekend. Just chilling. Hey Luke, hey Sanam, hey Enrique, welcome. Let's hop right into it. I have, oh, you can't see. I've got a lot of tabs open, basically. So I'm going to start with tools, software, things that were announced recently, and then we'll talk a little bit about the OPT thing. And then I think I put legislation next. I don't know. There's just a whole bunch of stuff. We'll get through it. Hey, Amir. Welcome. So first up from, and these are in no particular order besides generally category. From Anaconda, this was actually announced at PyCon. It's a new library, PyScript, that lets you run Python in your browser, and it is just flat HTML. So for those of you doing web development, this might be a cool tool to use. I'm sure it will also have its own unique security challenges, but cool thing. I really like the Anaconda folks, so interesting tool, may be helpful for some of you. Next up. There we go. All right, looks like it's working. Oh, right, this is a great one. So for those of you who aren't familiar, NLP Ghana is open source. I don't want that. No, I don't want it. I guess I'll just reload the page. NLP Ghana is a open source research group, I guess you'd call it, in Ghana. And this is their, I think it's version 2 of their translation tool. And it also includes some ASR, automatic speech recognition, as well. And the big thing is they added a bunch of languages. So the one I think they did the most work on was Dagbani. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. But we got Sui, Ga, Ewe, and Yoruba. So lots of languages of Western Africa, to each other, to and from English as well. And as well, there's an ASR component. So this is their free online tool. I don't use any of these languages and could not, do much besides use it to translate song lyrics, which I probably will do at some point. But there's also an app, and the app is paid, and that's part of how they're sustaining this this project. So if you are interested, I'd check them out. And the links are, you can't quite see. The links are all in this link tree is what these called. So it's linktree /NLP Ghana, and lots of information about that. So really cool project. Some languages that I think, don't have as much NLP work on them as they deserve. And also by people from the community solving problems they have. So you'll love to see it. Congrats on the launch, y'all. All right, next up. Oh, right, this is just gossip. This is just scuttlebutt. Can't hear me. Ooh. One sec. My levels look okay. And my monitor sounds okay. You can't hear me. Okay, fabulous. I was about to troubleshoot, but looks like I don't need to. Great. Anyway, this is just gossip that came up today, and that is that Ian Goodfellow. So if you're familiar with that, machine learning research, very well-known machine learning researcher who went to Apple a while ago. And if you're not familiar sort of with machine learning research as a field, an industry, Apple is sort of notoriously tight-lipped. People who go work for Apple, you just don't hear what they're doing anymore, basically. So he's going to be leaving, and in a note to staff, he said, "I believe strongly that more flexibility would have been the best policy for my team." So probably due to not being able to work from home. And if that is in fact their policy, then I imagine that Apple's probably going to lose other researchers as well, because they could go other places and get that. Anyway, I don't know that this news is 100% confirmed, but there you go. So that's the second high profile like researcher moving in the last 2 weeks. So lots of jumping around, which is not surprising. It's a very hot job market. All right. Next up, so this is actually more of like a reminder and hat tip to Odette for bringing it up. Oh, no worries. I appreciate people letting me know when the audio is an issue because it's been one in the past as well. Ow. Sorry, I just hit my elbow on the desk. So Odette Scherenborg shared this. And if you're not familiar with ISCA, it's the International Speech Association. I forget what the C stands for. But it's basically like the ACL, but for the speech side of things. And they have a lot of their proceedings available online for free. And like the ACL, it's one of those conferences where the archival proceedings are considered, the fancy type of publication. So just a heads up if you're not aware of that, lots of speech research is available as well. And then of course there's the ACL archive for more NLP stuff and less speechy stuff. All right. Oh, and this, I actually just saw this very, very recently, so I haven't had a chance to look through it at all. I just saw it and I was like, oh, it sounds like me. Emil, hello, welcome. And this is from Jen Wortman-Vaughn, perhaps? Again, apologies if I ever mispronounce somebody's name. Please feel free to correct me. I am not upset about it ever. So this is a tool set for researchers, a set of guided activities to help machine learning researchers recognize, exploit, and articulate limitations that arise in their research. So REAL, it's an acronym. And this is going to be part of FACT 22, so Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency in Machine Learning, which is sort of I would say it's emerging as the primary publication venue for papers around those general topics in machine learning. So paper forthcoming as well. And then there's a GitHub. Sorry, I wanted to say real food. That's not what this is at all. There is a GitHub repository as well, so that you can work through it. So yeah, I think this is something that I might want to. Let's look at it now, right? Why not? Let's see what it's like. All right, so guided activities, we love that. The process of conducting research is never without some limitation. I know this is a little bit small, but it's PDF, so I can't zoom in too much. I can't zoom in at all. Drawbacks in the design or execution of the research that present a possible threat to the validity of your findings and claims. Research rarely takes place under ideal conditions. Instead, researchers must frequently navigate practical constraints and unexpected challenges in seeking to answer their research questions. So this is basically like, you've written a paper, you want to like accurately talk about what you can and can't do with your research. How do you do that? And this is going to be, okay, so there's a 15-minute activity to familiarize yourself with common sources and types of limitations, unavoidable constraints, unforeseen challenges, implicit and explicit decisions, various examples here, types of limitations, applying that to your own research, expanding on each of the limitations you discover, writing that down in paper format. So yeah, I think this could be a really useful activity. I think people should do it. I don't know that, the big problem with machine learning research in general, let me back it up. So the big problem with something like NLP research and NLP research publications, I mentioned that conferences are considered sort of the fancy research publication that everybody wants, as opposed to in other fields when it might be journal papers, is that they are very limited in size. So an ACL short paper is 4 pages and a long paper is 8 pages. And if you have 8 pages to, describe your data set, your algorithm, your ablation testing, et cetera, you're probably not going to want to spend a page talking about the limitations of your work and why it's maybe not the best and greatest thing ever when you're trying to sell reviewers basically on how great your work is, which is kind of unfortunately, I would say, the disciplinary norm. Yeah, I don't know. I think it would take a bit of a shift for researchers to be willing to do this in every paper, and the disciplinary shift would be that they had to, or their research wouldn't get published. And I think that is more the case in more scientific fields, to be, maybe a little salty there. But for fields where like explanatory value and the amount of explanatory power your paper has or your research has is crucial to the work, explaining limitations is not optional. So anyway, very helpful. I think particularly this list of types of limitations is going to be really helpful for folks. So yeah, I think this is a good project. I'm glad to see it got published. I'll probably be reading this more in depth on my own time later, but just getting it out there. All right. Next up. Oh yes, another paper I think published this week. Handling and presenting harmful text. So is this... what's going to happen when I zoom in on this? Is it going to get weird? A little bit. Textual data can pose a risk of serious harm. These harms can be categorized around 3 types. The harm type, e.g. misinformation, hate speech, or racial stereotypes. Whether it is elicited, there's some LaTeX syntax bleeding into the HTML here, as a feature of the research design from directly studying harmful context versus invoked from working on unrelated problems. Sonam says, are there any peer-reviewed NLP journals? I tried searching, but I couldn't really find any decent ones. Yeah, journals are just sort of not really the prestigious publication venue. SCIL might have one. Let me check really quick if that's the case. SCIL was formed to basically entice linguists into NLP and vice versa. And it's the conference is held with the LSA conference, which is the Linguistic Society of America, an organization that's not covering itself in glory right at the moment, but there you go. Journal? There may be one. Proceedings. Yeah, I think you're mostly going to end up with proceedings. So sort of the state of the field, the way it is. Yeah, I think your best bet would be, if you really need a journal publication, your best bet would probably be to work in a cross-disciplinary problem where you're working with related fields, so something like digital humanities or, laboratory phonology or anything sort of literature related. I'd say that's probably going to fall more in the digital humanities, or language teaching is another area where there's a lot of journal publications. So I'd probably do cross-disciplinary work. I wouldn't, NLP journals are not in English considered the highest prestige publication venue. Good question. Okay, so just talking about different types of harms. It's an unsolved problem in NLP. This is behind my head. As to how textual harm should be handled, presented, and discussed, but stopping work on content which poses a risk of harm is untenable. Debatable. Debatable. Accordingly, we provide practical advice and introduce Harm Check, a resource for reflecting on research into textual harms. We hope our work encourages ethical, responsible, and respectful research in the NLP community. Okay, so this is going to be like another text tool. Yeah, it's in fact very doable to stop work that poses a risk of harm, and in some cases I think that is what people should be doing, but you know, I'm not queen of the universe, so. So another paper, let me actually, sorry. And that was Handling and Presenting Harmful Text by these folks. And then another one from NeurIPS, evaluating model performance under worst case subpopulations. So the reason that this paper really jumped out to me is that also, it's by a bunch of people from a business school, which is not usual for NeurIPS papers, I would say. And B, this sort of stratified evaluation is something that I have, you know, talked about a lot publicly, and how I think that it can be one tool to help identify potential sources of harm in your models. I don't think it's the most potent tool. I think the most potent tool is not to build things when they do have a high potential to create harm, but yeah, as one says, my thesis topic is identifying gender bias in social media data. So I guess some psych language communication journals would make sense. Yeah, you could try, I don't know that much about gender studies, but I think that's a related field where people might be interested. You might try, my brain keeps giving me the words gradient descent, and I don't think that's what the journal is called. Gradients? Chat, help me out if you know the one I mean. It's an online journal. The work is usually replicable. It's not focused just on NLP. It's more sort of focused on machine learning in general, but they do publish NLP stuff rather. I keep coming up with gradient descent. I know those aren't the right words, but those are the words my brain's giving me. So, yeah, if someone in the chat could help out, I would really appreciate it. Anyway, stratified sampling for evaluation. I'll just read the abstract and then we can move on. But I think it's interesting to take a look at research. I don't know. If you didn't think that, I don't think you'd be tuned in right now. So the performance of ML models degrades when the training population is different from that seen under operation. Towards assessing distributional robustness, we study the worst case performance of a model over all subpopulations of a given size, defined with respect to core attributes Z. Interesting. So the size of the subpopulation is held firm, which I would say, particularly in a sociolinguistic context, you really can't assume. But this is a simplified model. This notion of robustness can consider arbitrary continuous attribute Z, and automatically accounts for complex intersectionality in disadvantaged groups, so the margins, in a stats framework. We develop a scalable yet principled two-stage estimation procedure that can evaluate the robustness of state-of-the-art models. We prove that well, it's a NeurIPS paper, so they probably do actually prove it using proofs. We prove that our procedure enjoys several finite sample convergent guarantees. Okay, so they are actually proving it. This is a place where you can say prove. Including dimension-free convergence. Instead of overly conservative notions based on Rademacher? I'm not familiar with this measure. Complexities. Our evaluation error depends on the dimensions of Z only through the out-of-sample error in estimating the performance conditional on Z. Hold, please. Okay, audio should be a little bit better now. On real data sets, we demonstrate that our model certifies the robustness of a model. Our method certifies the robustness of a model and prevents deployment of unreliable models. So this is just basically a method to capture when some subpopulation of the population of interest is not being modeled well. So interesting paper. Always nice to have, mathematical guarantees of things, and, nice to have, particularly in machine learning. All right. And then another paper, and this one from the CHI Conference on Human Factors and Computing Systems. MDM, hold please. Hopefully now the audio will be better. Sorry for asking something unrelated to the current topic. Yeah, no worries. It's a coffee chat. Do you have any NLP project recommendations for beginners who are building up their portfolios? Ooh, that is a good question. I mean, in general, the project that's going to be the best portfolio project is one that you are genuinely interested in. That is, I don't want to say unique, right? It doesn't have to be something no one's ever done before, but I would just steer clear of like the, if it's been a Kaggle competition, I probably wouldn't put it in a portfolio unless you did really well in the competition, because lots of other people are going to have the exact same project, So something that's like a little bit more of a unique project, that's something that you're interested in, that, you can talk about at length. So yeah, I mean, you use language. What's a place where you use language and it's written down, right? Because it's an NLP project, where you could do something useful, right? Yeah, I think I have another video on my YouTube channel on like tier list of NLP tasks or something. So that might be a good video to watch to find just like a list of tasks that might be of interest to you. Let me see if I can find it real quick and pop it in the chat for you. All of that is to say, I don't want to give you a specific project recommendation because it's not going to be the project that you are most interested in, if that makes sense. And a portfolio project is A, for learning, but B, for you to have something, really cool that you want to show off to make people want to hire you, basically. All right, let's get here it is. In translation, we need to have. Let me grab loop than we do, but this and pop it in the chat. So there's a resource in there that's just a list of NLP tasks that you can go through, but I talk about each of them in the video. So if you would like a more accessible, sorry, my brain was like, affordable is the word you want. It was not. If you want a more accessible introduction, that's a good one. Okay. So this paper is from CHI, also potentially a place for you to look on for your work. It's not wrong, but I'm quite disappointed, toward an inclusive algorithmic experience for content creators with disability. And it's about YouTube, speak of the devil. YouTube is this place where people with disabilities can reach a wider online audience to present what it is like to have disabilities. Thus, it is imperative to understand how content creators with disabilities strategically interact with algorithms to draw viewers around the world. However, considering the algorithm carries the risk of making less inclusive decisions for users with disabilities, whether the current algorithmic experiences on video platforms is inclusive for creators with disabilities is an open question. I read that with weird intonation, but to address that, we conduct semi-structured interviews with 8 YouTubers with disabilities. We found that they aim to inform the public of diverse representations of disabilities, which led them to work with algorithms by strategically portraying disability identities. However, they were disappointed that the way the algorithms work did not sufficiently support their goals. Based on findings, we suggest implications for designing inclusive algorithm experiences that could embrace creators' subtle needs. And the algorithm here is being used in the way that a lot of people use it, which is to mean the recommendation systems, like what video will be recommended, which ones will be monetized or demonetized, perhaps might also be a theme that comes up. Again, I haven't read this, I just saw this and thought was like, oh, that's cool. So, yeah, interesting paper, especially if you're, working on recommendation systems to think about the accessibility angle. All right. This is not a paper, this is a keynote. on basically very focused on the US political system, but really talking a lot about surveillance and how that, how machine learning has enabled surveillance and what the consequences are for the people who are surveilled. So it's a YouTube video. I'd recommend checking it out. It's a little bit long, but I think lots of very important things to think about. Yeah, just great discussion, and I would recommend watching it. And then Khadija has at Up From the Cracks on Twitter has a really good discussion of the discussion as well. So that'll be a good one to check out. All right, wow, this is a big one. There was also a Nature opinion piece. So we talked a little bit last week about Proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS, which, again, especially for social sciences, Nature kind of has the same problem where you'll get sort of, sometimes you'll get like weird, almost fringe stuff being published in Nature that is within the field considered not great science sometimes. It depends, right? Particularly language stuff, Nature papers often create a lot of headaches for linguists and a lot of teachable moments, let's put it that way. So, but this is an opinion piece, and I think it's, I think it's fairly good. And it's talking about what building, fair machine learning systems looks like. And it, looks like working with social scientists, including lived experience. So things like the keynote I just talked about, thinking about, okay, how are the people who, not thinking about, but learning about how people who are impacted by surveillance systems are impacted by surveillance systems. Shifting power. So this is something that I think a lot about. So when we automate things, often what is automated is to the benefit of people with money, usually, and power, and what sometimes to the benefit of people without it, but often to their detriment. Checking assumptions. So I think overall a pretty solid piece. I think this would make a great assigned reading in an undergrad class if you're looking for something like that. So solid piece. And then this is a really interesting paper that I want to be able to dig into a little bit more, but just I haven't had time. I'm busy right now. And it is going to be at NACL 2022. And basically it's a paper where they had a bunch of complete beginners replicate NLP research. So really cool work. I think a fabulous, fabulous thing to think about, particularly when you are a researcher, particularly in a field like NLP where, people want to do our work, right? Like we have the nice thing of working in a field at a time where the general public is very interested in what we're doing and wants to be able to use the tools that we make, which is great, right? That's a privilege that not every field gets to have, but it's not usually something we consider during the research process. So this was a study with 93 students, and they found that basically when people try, it helps a lot. So documentation is important, and easy access, oh sorry, that's behind my head. Easy access to the required models and data sets is really important for people to be able to replicate work, which, has also been my own experience. And I'm sure those of you who've tried to replicate has also been your experience. So cool paper. I really want to be able to dig into it more. And it is Reproducibility Beyond the Research Community Experience from NLP Beginners by Storks, Yu, and Chai, and that'll be at NACL 2022, so this year. And then this is Kari Johnson for Wired has written some really great stuff on NLP and machine learning in general, a really good tech reporter. And he talked about Dolly, and this is, my foot's asleep. Oh, that's uncomfortable. Yee. I think I'm sitting on a nerve. One second, let me shift around and get some blood flow back into it. Those faces are also what Dolly makes me do. So if you're unfamiliar, it's basically a system where you provide a text prompt and it creates images for you. And if you can immediately come up with a bunch of horrible, horrible ways to use that system, we are on the same wavelength. And they've built in some, this is another one of OpenAI's patented, we're not releasing the stuff projects, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. We'll talk about that in a sec. They have like some, it's kind of basically stop word lists. So there's some things you can't ask the model to create, but they're very easy to work around. So there's been, I don't remember if there are any examples in here or not. No. But there's been a lot of people sharing information on Twitter and just like these like, oh, cool, look what you can do with this new technology sort of things, with like a very like playful attitude. And yeah, it's, reinforces stereotypes, no surprise there. It's, a language model that makes images basically. So that's undersimplifying the technology, but it is not undersimplifying the import. Anyway, also, so it's been a big news week. One of the things that was sort of not really covered as much, I think, is that the EU has a really massive tech regulation. I'm not as familiar with the way that the EU enacts legislation as I am with the US, because that's where I am. But it's out of the draft form, and I think it may or may not be law yet. Anyway, but it's called the Digital Services Act, or DSA. And there was a really good piece in the markup about what it's gonna happen, what this means. So some highlights of the law's requirements are you need to remove illegal content, and that includes hate speech or illegal projects. Hate speech in particular, I think there's going to be big ramifications for the NLP community. Algorithmic audits. So last week we talked about a company that was like weirdly promising to be able to like tell you if your model was biased in any way. And I was like, it's weird that they're doing this. I think that they are trying to capture market basically of people who are like, oh, dunk, we did not think through what we have done, and now we are legally required to. Sodom says Dolly gives you text and Dolly is you give text and the system creates an image using that text. Did I get that right? You did. And someone who's been doing, actually, let's just see if we can get some examples. Seeing some photos. Here the text is, the input text was a sign that says beware of dog, and the output is this picture of a sign, and the text says beware. It's very bad with text, not a surprise, but yes. This one is a tesseract in the middle of passing through the Astro Dimension Unreal Engine 8K. So that's that image. Leonardo enters the metaverse. So basically you can use it to generate images, and they're fairly artifacty, right? They look, if you have seen a lot of computer generated images, they look like computer generated images, but it's to the point where it might start really starting to fool people. So like right here, the monkey face, this looks very wrong to me. The number of toes, again, there's just something like, oh, you can't see that. What if I do this? Nope, you still can't see it. What if I do this? Get the monkey toes in there. There you go. So like this looks very wrong to me. But if you just like scrolled by this as clip art in a news story, maybe it wouldn't surprise you. And Hardmaru has been doing a lot of examples of different things that the system can do. And like, I don't have a problem with the system making like fun, cool things. Also, I think I said it was from OpenAI. It might be from Google. Anyway, regardless, we talked a little bit last week about why I don't do computer vision, and I think this is a project that I would not use. Someone says, the only use for Dolly that I can think about is when someone tries to describe a person to a sketch artist. Yeah. So there's an application that really has the potential to ruin somebody's life, right? I mean, A, eyewitness reports are very unreliable in general. And B, if, it kind of makes me think of I don't know if you've ever seen those things where someone's like, this Etsy artist drew a picture of my soulmate, and it's just a very generic person's face. It kind of feels like that to me, right? Where any person could be the suspect, right? Anybody could be your soulmate if they sort of have short hair, that sort of thing. So yeah, I can see clear potential for harm there as well. Anyway, so that's a system that is out and about and obviously has issues. All right, so we were talking about the Digital Services Act. I do not know when this is going to go into effect, and I do not know if there will be changes. I think this is past the draft stage. I think this is going to be pretty close to what the text of the law looks like. A ban on micro-targeted advertising. They initially sought to ban all behavioral targeting, but eventually settled for banning profiling of minors and the use of sensitive data pertaining to sexual orientation, religion, and ethnicity. And if you've been reading much about data brokers recently and the insane specificity that you can target using them, I think that's something that you may be aware of. It could be a good meme generator system. Yeah, maybe. I think there's fun uses for it, but the question is, does the value of those outweigh the harmful uses for it? And personally, I just feel like it doesn't, right? It's a toy that hurts people, so why would you keep using it? Anyway, MDM says, I wonder who holds the copyright to these generated images, the one who wrote the prompts or the one who made and deployed the model in the first place? That is a great question. I think there's a lot more, and by a lot more, I mean any case law around generated text and models than there is in image-based models. But yeah, I'm not a lawyer. It's a good question. I imagine the company that developed the algorithm would argue that they have copyright, probably. Yes. Hello, Ben. Do you want to come up? Do you want to say hi? No? Okay. Sorry, I'm getting bumped by my dog. Yeah, so some protections against that, but not a lot. Not a lot. Way more than we have in the US. Way more than we have in the US. A ban on dark patterns, design choices that mislead or still steer people into decisions they may not otherwise have made. Rules that require online marketplaces to have more accountability for the people they allow to sell on their platforms. User choice of algorithms. This is one that people have been talking about a lot. So when people say algorithms, they often mean recommendation systems. So what tweet do you see? What YouTube video do you see? Etc. And they require a chronological timeline. Dispute mechanisms. Users will have the right to appeal decisions made about the removal of their content, which is great because the sort of the reaction to things like SESTA and FOSTA in the United States has been, blanket banning of explicit content. So a great example there would be Tumblr, and then this again very focused on the US, but it affected everybody who used Tumblr. Completely banned all not safe for work content using some automated tools that I probably personally would not have used, but there we go, to avoid being prosecuted under these laws. So with this protection, EU users would have been able to dispute that. And as with GDPR, sorry, that's my dog. As with GDPR, it is expensive. It's going to be 6% of revenues, which for something like a Google or an Apple is not insignificant. So this is coming up. If you work in tech, you are absolutely going to hear a lot about it. And I feel like it just, at least for me, other things seem to be talked about a little bit more this week, but this is an important one. Oh, and this is just the same thing. And there's also a proposal for regulation. So the DSA, I think, is Digital Services Act is pretty certain to happen, is my current understanding. I talked to somebody who knows more about the EU than I do. But this one is for regulation around European health data, portability between providers, and also what you can and cannot do with it. And there's some discussion of like how very little, I imagine it'll either be expanded or contracted at some point in the future, of using health data specifically for training models. So we'll see what goes on there, but another thing to keep an eye on. All right. And, oh, this is just a fun one. Apparently, and I don't know if it's fixed, but if you included the exact string and period in a Google Doc, it caused it to crash. And this was on the May 5th, corroborated by Dr. Jessica Otis. So yeah, just sort of fun. And then there's a lot more discussion of the bug in this thread. Yeah, anyway, just sort of interesting. And okay, it's been fixed 2 days ago, but still, I don't know, sometimes a cool bug is a nice palate cleanser. Oh, speaking of palate cleansers, so this is probably the biggest news this week. I mean, honestly, I think the Digital Services Act is bigger news, but certainly in the NLP like subfield, this is something that people have been talking about a lot. So, little backstory. You may have heard of GPT 2 or 3, and this is probably going to be a review for some of you, in which case just ignore it. Skip ahead if you're watching the recording. And these were large language models that, very famously, OpenAI said it would not release GPT 2 because it was too dangerous. There was a whole bunch of press about that, like the model too dangerous to release, and they released it 9 months later. They had like sort of like a staged release process. That was what they did. GPT-3, the successor to GPT-2, even bigger, has not been released. So the only way that you can access it is through the public API, or if you are Microsoft, you can have access to the model. So Microsoft has exclusive rights to the GPT-3 model, basically. And it's been used in things like Copilot, the GitHub code autocomplete extension thing. So that's the background there. Meta, formerly known as Facebook, trained basically a new version of GPT-3. There were some tweaks. I think it was like a little bit faster train, a little bit more efficient. And they have open sourced their model. So the whole thing is available to everyone. This to me falls under the Dolly thing where this is a toy that hurts people, and I would not have done it, but they did it. And then they talk a little bit about it, and this is just the abstract. You can read the whole paper if you want, but we're going to talk a little bit more about it. Large language models, which are often trained for hundreds of thousand compute days, have shown remarkable capabilities for zero-shot and few-shot learning, and remarkably few actually useful, commercially viable things that you can do with them. Given their computational costs, these models are difficult to replicate without significant capital, understatement. For the few that are available through APIs, no access is granted to the full model weights, making them difficult to study. So this is basically GPT-3. We present Open Pre-trained Transformers, OPT, a suite of decoder-only pre-trained transformers ranging from 125 to 175 billion parameters, which I think is right where GPT-3 is, if I remember, which we aim to fully and responsibly share with interested researchers. We show that OPT 175B is comparable to GPT-3 while requiring only 1/7 of the carbon footprint to develop. We are also releasing our logbook detailing the infrastructure challenges we faced, along with code for experimenting with all of the released models. Sonam says, besides the training time and carbon footprint reduction, OPT is simply a replica of GPT-3, right? I don't know that they had exactly the same training data because I don't know information about the actual training data for GPT-3 is actually available. Most of it is publicly available data, but some of it, I think parts of the open book corpus are not findable easily, and perhaps, so I don't know that all the data for GPT-3 is actually available to use if you wanted to follow the data licenses. Let me put it that way. So this is what happened. And they do say the focus is on sharing it with researchers, which is good. Like, not everyone should just be able to get their hands on this very easy to use, very dangerous, very powerful model. And let's talk a little bit more about it, by which I mean, let's see what other people have said about it. So let's actually start with this one. Okay, so this is, they mentioned the logbook about, you know, how much the infrastructure challenges, and then this is what those infrastructures are. So this is on their GitHub. So it failed 64 times. They restarted it 44 times. It hung 28 times. Lost 21. Killed 15. Training large models is messy and hard. So if you've read the original Transformer paper, no, the BERT paper. If you've read the BERT paper, you may remember that there's a discussion in it of some runs being degenerate, which means that they don't. Some runs don't work depending on the random initialization. It's impossible to predict beforehand what runs those are going to be. So whenever you see somebody training a big transformer language model, assume that they have trained multiple ones, because at least some of them didn't work, unless you're like insanely lucky and it worked on the first try. And I'm not gonna choose to show the ones with offensive content. I thought there were more replies to this, but I'm not signed in, so maybe that's why it looks like that. Anyway, there was a lot of, it's hard, right? It's hard to build these type of models. It's a big engineering challenge. It's a lot of data. It's a lot of compute. It's a lot of parameters. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. There's a lot of stuff that can break. And then here are, you know, just some of the issues that they had. So this was on in January, and just like talking about the many different types of issues that they had and they had to fix, et cetera, et cetera. It is I'm just continuing to scroll so you can see sort of the scale of this work. And this, I have not trained a large language model. I would not choose to train a large language model for a number of reasons that I imagine we will talk about in just a second. But it's a big engineering challenge, right? It's hard to do. And I think this is helpful, I guess, to talk about just how hard it is to do. What a lot of time and money and compute people have spent doing this thing that, again, has pretty limited, you know, practical applications outside of being a plaything. Anyway, so if you're interested in learning more about that, I would, you know, I just scrolled really quickly so you could get a sense of the amount of work that it was. So the first entry was from November of last year. Anyway, yeah, it's hard engineering work. It's difficult. Not everyone can do it. Not to say that not everyone could do it, but having the time of people and also time of computer to do it is a luxury. All right. And they also released a technical report. I'm just going to read through this. So this is by Arthur Holland Michael, or Michelle, perhaps. And the report is on archive. The report is on archived, and this is the one that we were just looking at, and it includes a lot of discussion of things. And you may notice that this is more than 8 pages. So when I was sort of making faces earlier on saying that, you know, oh, NLP papers are, you know, 4 pages or 8 pages, that is true if you're publishing at conferences. If you're doing something, people have called it publication by press release. OpenAI does this a lot. Basically, when you're like, I want to release a paper, I'm just going to put a paper on archive and then tell people that I've done it. And because of who, you know, what my company is and what we're working on, we're just going to get press coverage. So it will be as good as publishing it at a venue, except without that pesky peer review. That's basically what's going on here. And usually they are at some point eventually peer reviewed and accepted. But I mean, there's no way to hide that the BERT paper is the BERT paper, right? You know what I mean? There's no way to hide that, like, oh, this is the GPT-3 paper, even if you know redacted as much information as you possibly could, it would still not be anonymous. And if you were one of the reviewers on that paper, you'd probably have a pretty hard time saying this is not influential work. So I don't think it's great for the peer review process, but people do it. And for things like that, you have, obviously as much space as you care to take. It's definitely, Sonam says, it's definitely a big task requiring compute power and human resources. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time and effort and energy. Like I said, I don't think large language models are all that useful in positive ways. I think they're very harmful in ways that we don't even know about yet. And I wish people would stop wasting time and energy and resources on them, basically, is where I am. Anyway. So speaking of harmful, Arthur here has picked out bits of the report, so I'm just going to use this instead of reading through it because I am tired. Bottom line, across all tests, they found that OPT 175B has a high propensity to generate toxic language and reinforce harmful stereotypes. Comparing it to GPT-3, another model released last year, the team found that OPT 175B has a higher toxicity rate and appears to exhibit more stereotypical biases in almost all categories except for religion. They found that it can make harmful content even when provided with a relatively innocuous prompt, meaning that it might do some nasty thing regardless of whether or not you tell it to, which I think is a pretty big problem with language models in general. Why streaming on YouTube? You used to stream on Twitch, right? I am streaming on both. So I use a application called Restream. Yeah, and I have a viewer on Twitch. Hi, Twitch viewer. But I'm also keeping an eye on both chats. So and the main reason for that is that YouTube keeps the video longer. So if people want to go back and watch it a little bit later, they can on YouTube. Good question. Yeah, so you can end up with horrible, nasty things coming out of the model even if you didn't ask for them. They also discovered that it is trivial to come up with adversarial prompts, i.e. it's easy to trick the system into creating toxic stuff. There was a lot of work on this with BERT when it first came up, identifying these sort of adversarial prompts, which to a human looked, a lot of them just sort of looked meaningless, right? It would be like a couple characters, but would always prompt this toxicity. OpenAI made a similar discovery when testing Dolly. Okay, so maybe it is an OpenAI project, and I guess Hardmatter was just using it. No matter how many guardrails they set, there's always a way. So this is an example. We just talked about Dolly, right? The system's anti-violence filters, here talking about Dolly, wouldn't allow the user to generate an image of a dead horse in a pool of blood, but it will happily generate a photo of a horse sleeping in a pool of red liquid. So this is what I meant when I said even though they had guardrails, it is very doable to, abuse the system, basically. Because the model is large and complex, the authors also admit that they seem to only be able to sort of guess why it's so noxious. When explaining the reasons for its toxic behavior, they use phrases like "we suspect" and "this is likely due to." So, I don't know that this is necessarily the fault of the system being large and complex, so much as it is the fact that we just don't have that many theoretical guarantees. Like, there's very little that we've proven about deep learning, and we are coming up with new architectures far faster than we are coming up with, mathematical understanding of how they work, basically. By which I mean, we know how gradient descent works, but I cannot look at an architecture and a data set and tell you what the output would be, right? There is no mathematical model for that. And as a result, like, we suspect and likely due to is pretty much the best we can do. There's a whole field of explainable AI that a lot of time and energy has been put into, but far less than, for example, training large language models. That being said, they do have a strong hunch that its toxicity could have a lot to do with the fact that a primary source for the system is a giant database of unmoderated text from Reddit. Reddit is a very popular corpus in NLP. Their reuse, developer agreement. It's not the EULA. well, I guess it is the EULA, right? Because the end user's license agreement, since the users have to agree to it, but their developer agreement is pretty permissive. Not quite as permissive as Wikipedia, but Wikipedia has far less dyadic discussion, or multi-adic. It doesn't have to be just dyads, than Reddit does. By their own admission, the dataset from Reddit has a higher incidence rate for stereotypes and discriminatory text than similar datasets drawn from sources such as Wikipedia. I think it was also only very recently on Reddit that, explicitly, like calls for violence or, white nationalists were banned. And I want to say it was in like 2016, 2017. There's a lot of horrible things in Reddit corpuses. Let me put it that way. So this hunch seems to be a good one. Imagine if instead of teaching your child to read and write using Where the Wild Things Are and Goodnight Moon, you just use millions of pages of things people say on Reddit. A little bit unfair, because models are not children, right? Your child is also going to have social interactions with you, another human being. So even if they, read a lot of Reddit, if they had strong social interactions and guidance from other people in their social circles, it's not necessarily going to shape their behavior. People are not as deterministic as models, and also large language models are very non-deterministic. They also hint at a vexing catch-22. In order to be able to detect and filter toxic outputs, the system needs to be highly familiar with said toxic language. But this can also increase its open-ended capacity to be toxic. Yes. So there's the paper that we looked at briefly about what to do with harmful text, I think was written by researchers at a company that does, hate speech detection, right, is their stated goal. Yeah. I mean, this comes from having one model that you're trying to do everything with, right? Trying to stuff everything into this one generalizable model. And the claim is that, if we just have like one really big model, it works for everything. We don't need to train a bunch of other smaller models. We're going to end up saving, more time and energy overall. That has not been my experience as an industry practitioner. And small specialized models on specific things are still overwhelmingly the most useful type of NLP model, but they're not the type of NLP model that gets you, keynotes at NACL. So there you go. And then talking about, this was from a while ago. It was a system to identify non-toxic drugs and, when inverted, identified bioweapons. So fun. To be clear, the team says that OPT 175B is premature for commercial deployment, but their findings point to just how much more work needs to be done before that happens. Again, I know that BERT results were folded into Google search at one point. I don't know if that's still the case. There's a lot of A/B testing in Google results. And of course, there's Copilot, which is that autocomplete code completion tool from GitHub that was, I'm sure, very tuned on GitHub data. And then also there's GPT Dungeon, which is like a role-playing game where you play with a language model. And then I've seen a lot of people saying that their startups can do things that I genuinely don't believe that they can do. And that seems to be sort of the state of the art with large language models, at least in my experience. And there's probably stuff that I haven't heard of that does work, but I spent a lot of time and money and our planet's limited resources for, Anyway, a big part of why Meta released the model is so that a broader community can address these issues. Looks like it's going to take a whole bunch of smart people to figure this out. Maybe. That's why they said they released it. To be sure, there may also be questions of whether the researchers have set sufficient groundwork for that to happen, not to mention whether OPT 175B will create real harms, even at this experimental stage. I'm positive it will. For example, even though some mitigation measures do exist to prevent harms rising from these systems, the authors admit they have not applied such measures to OPT 175B. Why? Because their primary goal here was to replicate GPT-3. That's significant. It shows they attempt not to reduce the system's propensity to be harmful because they fear that doing so would also reduce its performance relative to a competitor's AI. They also refrained from applying what they admit is necessary scrutiny to the AI's training data set because their current practice is to feed the model with as much data set as possible and minimal selection. And then it talks more in depth about the model card. And of course there's the paper, and I don't know. I don't know if I want to read the paper on stream or not. I'm going to read the paper at some point, but it's like, why, I guess? If I were being cynical, I would say that it is to reduce a competitor's competitive advantage, and for, pretty much no other reason. But I'm sure that the people who are working on the project believe that there are other reasons, and are genuinely believe that they're doing the right thing. At least I hope so. But I don't. I would not have done this. Like I said, I wouldn't have trained a large language model at all because I just don't think they're that useful, and I think the propensity for harm is unbelievable. So, anyway, so I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about this in the days to come. If y'all remember, after BERT came out, there's a big field of BERTology, of people studying the model in depth, because it was open sourced. And I'm sure that this will open up a lot of optology, or whatever you want to call it, of studying the model in depth. But again, like, it's a machine that kicks things, right? Just to do create a metaphor, right? Like, it's a machine that kicks things, and sometimes it can, kick a soccer ball into a goal. That's fun. And sometimes it can, maybe kick litter into a trash can, and that's cool. But fundamentally, there's not a need for the kicker machine, especially if it can't distinguish between the things that it is kicking or where they might go. That's maybe a little bit of too of a metaphor, but anyway, just why? Anyway, let's end on a little bit of a bright note. So this is the last thing I had for today. And this is a fundraiser to help African people who are interested in getting into tech get access to devices. So as they say here, lack of access to devices remains one of the main challenges that hinder young Africans from getting into tech, coupled with unstable electricity and poor or no internet connection. And this fundraiser was organized by Claire T and Ivy B, whose Twitter handle is Ivy. Sorry, names are very difficult for me. Let me pull it up real quick. Barley, Ivy Barley. I knew it was a plant. My mind kept being like, it's Burns. And I was like, it's not Burns. Brain. Nice try. Ivy Barley, who's, spent years helping people get into tech in Africa, and particularly women. So 60% of the laptops that they fund with this fundraiser will go to women, which is fabulous. So they're looking for donations. If you're able, I think it's a really good thing to do. And like I mentioned, with the Ghana NLP project earlier on, I think it's great when people can build the technology that they need for themselves, and this is a great way to do that. All right. Sonam says, for the next stream, could we chat about training versus not training large language models? Just a suggestion. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I've got a lot of thoughts on it. Maybe it should be a blog post instead, though, because I'm going to need to, articulate it well, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, I have just about finished my coffee, and, my voice is going. There it goes. Just as a note, drinking coffee while you're talking is a horrible idea. It's not good for your vocal folds. It can cause a lot of inflammation, but it makes me happy, so I still do it. yeah, I think I'm going to wrap that up for today. That's about all that I had. And I've sort of considered putting together a to-do list. It's not what it's called. A newsletter with a bunch of links and stuff, but it's just, it's so much work to write things down. So I don't know that I'm going to do it. Certainly not right now. I got a lot going on in my life. But yeah, this was fun. Thanks for coming, everybody. I hope you found it, helpful, and I will, like I mentioned, wrap it up here. I'll see you next Saturday. As far as I know, I'm planning on doing this next Saturday at the same time. So it'll be great to see all y'all. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe, stay cool, particularly if you're in India and Pakistan. I know it's really rough there right now. Yeah, I will talk to y'all later. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.